Somewhere in a cave in northern Spain, almost 900,000 years ago, someone picked up a stone tool and did something to a child's neck precise enough that scientists, nearly 1,000,000 years later, could look at the marks and know exactly what had happened. No guesswork, no ambiguity, just precise, deliberate cuts in exactly the right places. So did this actually happen the way it sounds? The way campfire stories and horror movies love to exaggerate it? Was eating other humans really part of ancient life? Or is this one of those stories that gets stretched every time it's retold? Scientists don't take this claim lightly, because the bar for proof is brutally high. A broken bone alone proves nothing. It could mean an animal scavenged a body, or a burial ritual involved defleshing, or a landslide crushed a skeleton centuries after death. Plenty of older claims of ancient cannibalism have quietly been walked back once researchers took a second, more careful look at the same bones. To call something cannibalism today, with confidence, researchers look for a specific signature: cut marks in the same places you'd find on a butchered deer, bones cracked open the exact way marrow-hungry hands crack open animal limbs, and human remains discarded in the same trash layer as ordinary meals, not buried with any care at all. At a cave system in Spain called Atapuerca, that signature shows up again and again. The site is called Gran Dolina, and the remains found deep inside it belong to a species called Homo antecessor, a human relative that lived roughly 1 million to 770,000 years ago. Scientists still debate exactly where this species sits on the family tree, whether it's a direct ancestor shared by both Neanderthals and modern humans, or a separate branch that simply died out. Either way, it's one of the earliest known human relatives in Europe. One of the most recent finds is a child's neck bone, dated to about 850,000 years old, pulled carefully from a layer researchers call the aurora stratum. The bone shows cut marks, so precise that Dr. Palmira Saladie, one of the archaeologists leading the dig, described the case as striking, both for the child's age and for how exact the incisions were. The child was somewhere between 2 and 5 years old at the time of death, an age at which survival cannibalism during a desperate famine seems like an unlikely explanation on its own. This isn't a single unlucky skeleton found once and never seen again. Over 3 decades of careful digging at this one single cave, archaeologists have documented more than 24 separate cases across multiple excavation seasons. Roughly a third of all the ancient human bones ever recovered from the site carry cut marks, a strikingly consistent number across 3 decades of separate excavation seasons. And here's the detail that convinces most researchers this wasn't a one-time act of desperation, a single family driven to the edge by hunger. Those human bones show up mixed in with deer bones and horse bones, processed with the same tools, in the same way, in the same layer of debris. Whoever did this at Gran Dolina wasn't treating these people any differently than they treated prey animals caught in the same hunt. Some researchers think it may not have even been about hunger at all. One leading theory is that this was entirely about territory. Caves and hunting grounds were valuable and scarce, and a rival group moving in was direct competition for both, the same way a wolf pack might treat a rival pack encroaching on its range. Killing and eating them might have doubled at once as both a message and a meal, a way of eliminating the threat and getting something valuable out of it at the same time. This story is still being written, right now. During a recent excavation season, archaeologists pulled 24 additional bones out of a slightly different layer at the same site, raising the number of known individuals there to somewhere between 13 and 15 people. Crucially, the newer bones include adults, not just children, which means whatever was happening at Gran Dolina wasn't limited to the most vulnerable members of a group. Stone tools, made from flint, quartzite, and sandstone, turned up in the same soil, alongside the same kind of ordinary hunting debris you'd expect from any successful kill. Entire families may have ended up as meals, generation after generation, at the same cave, and researchers say there's likely more waiting in the unexcavated layers still beneath their feet. And Homo antecessor wasn't the last human species to do this. Hundreds of thousands of years later, Neanderthals were leaving nearly identical evidence behind in caves across Western Europe. At a site called Moula Guerci in France and another called El Cidrón in Spain, researchers have documented cut marks, deliberately smashed long bones, and skulls opened for the tissue inside, found alongside the remains of red deer and other game processed the exact same way. At El Cidrón, genetic testing even confirmed the victims were closely related. A family group, not strangers caught in a raid. Different species, different continent, same grim signature, repeated across an almost incomprehensible stretch of time. Whatever this behavior was, it wasn't a fluke. It kept happening. But here's where the story gets more complicated than a simple story about ancient violence. Not every documented case of humans eating humans was about conflict or hunger at all. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, a group called the Four practiced a funeral custom well into the 20th century where relatives consumed parts of the deceased, including brain tissue, as an act of grief and respect rather than aggression, a way of keeping a loved one close rather than surrendering them entirely to the ground. It's intimate, and it's ritual, passed down and understood within the community as an ordinary, expected part of mourning a loved one properly. And it turned out to be catastrophic, because the brain tissue was quietly carrying a misfolded protein called a prion, and eating it could transmit a fatal, incurable brain disease called kuru. At its peak, the disease killed close to 10% of the Four population before the practice ended in the late 1950s. An American researcher named Daniel Carlton Gajdusek spent years studying the outbreak, eventually proving the disease was infectious rather than some kind of curse, work that later earned him a Nobel Prize. And here's the part that made scientists sit up. Even stranger, researchers later found a second variant, unique to the Four and found nowhere else on Earth, that appears to have emerged and spread specifically during the decades of the epidemic itself, essentially in living memory. It's one of the rare documented cases of scientists watching natural selection actively reshape a human population in real time, because of cannibalism. But the more common, older variant tells an even bigger story, one that reaches far beyond a single valley in Papua New Guinea. The mutation involves a single amino acid substituted at one specific spot in the gene, a change so small it seems almost impossible that it could mean the difference between surviving a brain-eating epidemic and not. Researchers checked that same protective gene variant in roughly 1,000 people from unrelated populations scattered across the entire planet, and found it almost everywhere they looked. That pattern has a name: balancing selection, the same rare evolutionary mechanism responsible for sickle cell trait persisting in regions with heavy malaria, where carrying one copy of a gene protects you even though 2 copies causes serious illness. It's only been documented in a handful of human genes. The prion gene is one of them. The genetic fingerprint of resistance to a cannibalism-linked brain disease appears to have been shaped by natural selection worldwide, and dated back roughly 500,000 years, long before humans had even finished spreading across the globe. The only realistic explanation researchers have offered is that kuru-like epidemics, triggered by eating human tissue, weren't confined to one small population in one remote valley. They were common enough across ancient humanity to leave a permanent, worldwide fingerprint in the human genome itself. Put plainly, whether or not your specific ancestors ever did this, the gene sitting in your own cells may only make sense if, somewhere far back in your family tree, someone did. So the answer to the question is yes, unmistakably, and not as some rare exception buried in one strange cave. The evidence spans nearly 1 million years, multiple human species, and at least 2 very different motives: violent competition over territory in Spain, and grieving ritual on the other side of the planet, thousands of generations later. One left cut marks in Stone Age caves. The other left its signature written directly into human DNA, carried by nearly everyone alive on Earth today, whether they know it or not. We tend to imagine our ancestors as either noble survivors or simple brutes, and neither picture is quite right, and probably never was. They were capable of extraordinary tenderness toward their dead, gentle enough to eat a grandmother's remains out of love and grief rather than let her go completely. And they were capable of treating a rival exactly like a deer, butchered with the same tools, discarded in the same pile of bones. Sometimes, unsettlingly, both instincts came from the same basic drive, using every resource available to make it to the next season, whatever that resource happened to be, and whoever it happened to be. The cave in Spain is still being excavated right now, this year, while you're watching this. Every new season adds more bones to the count, and so far, every single one of them tells the same story.